Congressman Green is joining us on the live line. Let's start first and foremost with the White House yesterday, and we had our latest Corona conference, and then the president came out with the Treasury Secretary, and we began to get a view of this administration's attempts to make this volatile, uncertain time as short as possible medically, and the economic harm is non-permanent as possible. That seems to be the mentality. Your thoughts on just what's been kicked around and where it stands?
Yeah, I think there's a huge commitment to make sure both the workers and the employers are taken care of. Obviously, the disruptions to the economy are going to be pretty significant, particularly to industries like restaurants and, the airline industry, clearly the cruise industry. So, but we got to make sure, one of the things I want to make sure is that we're not missing people in this process. You take, for example, there are guys who drive people to and from the airport. I mean, if the flights are down, then that means those guys are getting hurt too. So we just have to be very careful. Whatever system we put in place, it's got to make sure that it's fair and that the government isn't picking the winners and the losers.
Well, you just said the exact phrase I was going to use, Congressman, and that is, I don't like blank checks. I don't like a government that stands and tells you that they're the solution for everything. And at the end of the day, if you use this crisis and expand their power and expand their reach, and then they never give it back, or do we plan to act like this for every little virus, it gets very troubling. But you just used the magic words. Once you start playing this game, you're in the game of picking winners and losers. And that's what I don't like. I mean, we saw that at the news conference yesterday. The Treasury Treasury Secretary didn't have anything to say for restaurants. We eat a lot of fast food. Yeah, well, that's a big part of our health problem. But anyway, so I guess we'll eat a little bit more. Or there are some businesses that have apps and so on. So you're picking winners and losers. You're basically saying, and I don't have to tell you, literally prostitutes are in line wanting money while their brothels are down. Casinos got their hand out because, they're always bailing out their players after they lose. So where do you end this? I mean, you're going to be in the picking winners and losers game. I think it's a dangerous game to play, personally.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. That's why I prefer sort of interest-free loans, or, if the government just does it that way, and a business isn't forced to take a loan, because remember back during TARP, I mean, there were banks that didn't want to take the money. I know BB&T was one of those. John Allison, the CEO, did everything he could to refuse taking TARP. They made him take TARP. Then, of course, he paid it back very quickly. So we shouldn't make companies take the loans, but I think the loan method is much better, especially if there's a big problem and we want to make it interest-free. That's the better way to go. If the government starts picking, and I'll give you an example, the payroll tax. There was a proposal to use payroll tax. That was part of the House correction bill, not the original 110 pages, but the 89-page technical correction that passed on Monday. That you take an entrepreneur who isn't making a positive yet, or if it's just a tax credit and he's not making income, he's not paying taxes, but he's got 80 people or so, or 50, 75 people, he's got to pay payroll and all this. And so some of those mandates in that bill and the method to make people whole with a tax credit just won't work for every business. So this is a problem when government tries to basically, like we said, pick the winners and losers. Hello? Hello?
Well, Congressman, apparently we've lost Michael momentarily here. We're going to try to get him back. We'll take a break and then we'll come back.
I'm back.
Oh, there you are.
There we go.
Yeah,
sorry about that.
We lost you.
Well, it was a button, but it's a new button that I'll never miss hit again. Congressman, I was just going to ask you a question that I think is very, very important. And that is, I looked down at the 15 days to slow the spread. And again, the first thing I would circle, and you're a doctor, so chime in any time, but the first thing I would circle is, in all this uncertainty, there's nobody that believes it's 15 days. All right, so all right, there's your 15 days. Then you have, if you feel sick, stay home. That's common sense, just like washing your hands. If your child's sick, keep them home. Don't send them to school. Of course, there's no school for them to go to now. We're going to get to that in a moment, which is one of the main reasons we're talking to you. And then it goes on and on. But the first thing on the list is listen to and follow the directions of your state and local authorities, as if all state and local authorities are going to act the same way. So we have, you can't have the president, and I kind of like payroll tax, to be honest with you, but to keep people from being furloughed and let go. But you can't say to everybody, we're going to do this federal package to help everybody, when everybody isn't everybody. It depends on what state and local authority you're under and what ridiculous measures they're doing and they're taking. One may cancel election, one may not. One may close all schools indefinitely, may just close schools in districts where they've had a positive case. I mean, to me, that's the problem with all of this from the administration. And I think if you go back to big picture, it's trying to find a federal solution for a local virus, right? Or trying to be all things to all people when you can't, or pick winners and losers. And I don't think all countries should react the same to this virus, and I don't think all states should act the same to this virus. And they don't, and some have worse circumstances because of it. So I guess I just don't like this blanket blank check and laying down of one's freedom and will, all in the name of fear and uncertainty, when most of the uncertainty might come from different state and local authorities' agendas. Does that make sense?
No, it makes complete sense to me, and I think there are states that will have different needs. You look at Washington and New York right now; they have significantly different needs than we do, and so the response should be proportional to the need. But there are things.
But you know, Congressman, that's not happening, right? Because the minute one league cancels all its games, all the leagues got to cancel. You look like a heel if you don't. These things kind of tumble and domino. And I'm just getting a sense, and I'm just saying this out loud, just you and me, maybe a few 100,000 people listening, but it just seems like whatever is suggested today is reality tomorrow, and God forbid what they suggest the day after.
Yeah, I do believe that there's this competition going on who's going to one-up the other on taking care of people in the crisis, right? I think that it's an election year, and there's a lot of that. I mean, I voted. It takes a lot of courage to say, no, I'm not going to vote for a bill that is there to help people who are sick from a virus, right? But if you look at the truth of what the bill does, and a lot of these bills, they're going to have some good stuff in them, and then they're going to have some stuff that potentially could really harm the economy. And after the virus has gone through, people are going to need a job in order to eat. So
No, wait. Let me rephrase that for you, Congressman. People are going to need a job to fund this government. Government has no money. It just takes money from others.
Yeah, very interestingly, we're going to go borrow money to solve this problem from countries like China, who gave us the virus in the first place because they refused to close their live animal markets.
I want to just stop this interview. I want to stop this interview right in the middle and just thank Almighty God for my Congressman Green. Thank you, dear Lord. Thank you.
You're
All right. I'm not alone, so I'm not the only nut here. Good. Because it just seems like everybody's on board with this. And it doesn't matter if you're a Republican or you're a Democrat, but, debt is debt. I don't care who does it. Overreaction is overreaction. I don't care who does it. Fear-mongering is fear-mongering. I don't care who the hell does it.
Yeah, no,
all right.
Right.
So now our kids are not at school. When are they going to go back? I know you visited with the education secretary. What kind of a dilemma have we created for ourselves here? I don't know how anybody, if you're going to do this now, illogically, because it doesn't seem to have much effect on the kids, it's not 15 days, and nobody even really believes it's 2 months. Are my kids ever going back to school?
They're going to go back to school because they got to make up the, the educational piece of this. Some of the schools just don't have the capacity to do online instruction, so they're going back. So the disruption that happens and how long, your question is how long is it going to be? It really depends. I think what we'll have to do is look at the cases and how the new cases, if the new cases are falling, that's probably, and are falling pretty significantly, that's probably a good sign that we can, end the social distancing stuff. And I would imagine that's what the state health department's looking at. I have not talked to those guys. I know the Trump administration has. HHS is talking to them probably 2 or 3 times a day. But, they'll make that decision based off the propagation of the virus.
And I know you looked into this, but how do we handle, assessment tests and.
Yeah, I actually got contacted by the professional educators of Tennessee and a bunch of teachers and raised the issue with Betsy DeVos. You obviously cannot use absenteeism and the assessments this year to grade school systems and determine federal funding because, I mean, this disruption just makes that impossible. And the teachers, especially impactful on the teachers. So what we've got to do is get her to give us a one-year waiver. I requested that in a letter. Right now I'm getting as many other congressmen to sign on to that letter, and folks within the listening audience who aren't in Tennessee 7 could call their congressman and ask them to sign that letter. That would be great. But we'll get the teachers, the students, and the administrators some relief there.
All right. Well, now that we've just talked about all of our concerns about the government trying to be all things to all people and pick winners and losers, where do we stand with everything that the president laid out yesterday, that the Treasury Secretary said he was on his way immediately to the House to meet with both the Senate and the House leadership? Where do we stand with all of this? And give us a couple of things that we really think are smart.
So they made some corrections to the House bill that was passed last Friday, Monday night. That bill, the corrected bill, has gone to the Senate, and the Senate is currently working. And what they may do is actually add the big stimulus, whatever that looks like, whatever that becomes in their negotiation, to the bill that the House passed Monday night. So that's the current negotiation is all those things that Mnuchin listed that they want. They're working with the Senate to get them added to that bill, and then it'll come back to the House for final approval. I think some of the good things in there are, testing. We obviously need to be able to test everybody to understand what right now, and talking to Anthony Fauci, we really don't know for sure that kids can be carriers. So this notion that a child can not get sick but be a carrier to someone else, they think that's true. They just don't have enough data to say definitively.
I mean, the whole thing, the whole entire understanding is assumptive medicine, right? I mean, it's crazy what people are assuming.
Well, some of the things, absolutely for certain, we know that this virus targets the elderly and the comorbid. You can make that a very definitive statement. There's enough data and analytics, right? How the disease spreads.
How I protect my mother and us locking down nursing home facilities, that makes sense. See the state of Washington. Not going on a cruise, which is very elderly populated, if you're elderly, does not make sense right now. I get that. But shutting down elementaries. By the way, I love this moment when somebody asked the question, and I think it was Fauci. Fauci was standing there along with a woman. I can never remember her name, and it doesn't matter right now. But and somebody brought up daycare. How does it make sense if we're going to close all schools, not because anything can happen to the kids, but because the kids can maybe get it, and we, like you just said, we don't know that they can actually carry it, and they'll bring it home to their elderly grandparents, assuming we have no self-control or ability to protect our elderly parents. The government must do it. But the reality is then you still got them going to daycare. And can a daycare kid come up and hug his grandmother and grandfather after catching it at daycare? Well, the look on Fauci's face was, oh, crap, we forgot that. And so it's not surprising today that in Ohio, they're closing down daycares. And then what next are we going to think? So I just don't know how you play this isolation game, and I don't know how you base it on wild assumptions. But you're right. What we do know is if you have an autoimmune deficiency, if you have heart disease, if you have lung disease, and if you're elderly, and we don't know what elderly is at first. I mean, for sure, it's everybody running for president. But I mean, that made me laugh, Congressman. But we don't know if it dips down to 60. By and large, it's pretty much over 70, depending on where you're at. We also know that different forms of healthcare in different countries seem to be more effective than others. But what we do know and what we don't know, I mean, we got to be guilty of overreaction here, or some things that aren't rational. Heck, I'm looking at their own 15 days slow the spread. And if you look at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, I'm fine. You look at 1, which is state and local authorities, and boom, that's led to a complete shutdown of the economy. And you can't have it both ways. It can't be, I guess, unless you want the states and local authorities to have all the heat afterwards. Oh, okay, so the whole thing's gone in 8 weeks, and DelGiorno and Green were right, but meanwhile, nobody has a job. That's where I don't want to end up.
Yeah, exactly, and we're going to have to be very careful. And that's why I like the loan, in the president's announcement on Friday of the, national emergency declaration, he talked about SBA loans. And in looking at that program, and they just came out with some details of it, I mean, it actually looks like a very good program and could really wind up being a huge positive. So depending on this package coming out of the Senate, there is a chance that it winds up being on the businesses to borrow and then pay back and, do it in a way that's dependent on the business, not on the government forcing money on people. I think there could be a huge positive, and this winds up being a V recession if we have one at all, a V-shaped recession, which is the good kind where you drop down and then you bounce right back out of it. I mean, our economy was, just going crazy prior to this, so there's a lot of hope that the fundamentals of the economy, unlike in 2008, the fundamentals of the economy are still very strong. We get through this, hopefully with as few people having long-term effects and as few deaths as possible, and boom, this economy explodes and we're back in business.
And in a perfect world with plenty of time before the general election, I'm guessing.
I'm hoping.
Yeah, you and me both. I wasn't being completely sarcastic there.
Yeah, no, I got
Yeah, you're actually my congressman, and
cool.
It's
You're
nice
my boss.
It's nice to have a congressman that I like, and because I used to have to hang out with Desjardins because he was the only congressman in our state I really, 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 really liked. Now I have two I really like, including the one that's representing me, and it's so fun to have you as a resource on the air as well. By the way, I know this isn't necessarily your field of expertise in medicine, but somebody might be looking at the radio going, you're talking to a doctor too, and you haven't asked him about COVID and how concerned we should be. I think what you would address is real symptoms, what we really know, versus fear and worry, which, by the way, is more stressful to the body than what we do know about this virus.
When I ran emergency departments, I used to tell my doctors, a big part of what you treat is fear because patients don't know. And one of the things that's really impressed me, and I've called around to several of my colleagues in the Middle Tennessee area, and the volume in the emergency departments in Middle Tennessee are down, meaning people are doing it correctly. If they're sick, they're staying home. If they think they need a test, they're calling their doctor. They're not just rushing the emergency department. I talked to a buddy in Georgia, and he said people are just coming in demanding tests in the ER, and their ERs are just bursting at the seams. And that's a really good sign that Tennesseans are respectful of each other. And, you take the Dollar General decision. Here's a Tennessee-based company that preferentially set up hours for people 60 and above to come into the store. I mean, that's just very thoughtful, makes sense to, to the current crisis. Tennesseans are doing really good stuff for this.
We saw that with the tornado, and we're seeing it again. And may I also add, there's a big difference between the leadership of Governor Bill Lee and an Ohio governor like Mike DeWine. And one is really irreparably harming his economy. And voters are going to probably, unfortunately, take it out on the president because they can't get to DeWine for 2 more years. And that might be a problem in a swing state. But
I think
it comes from leadership, but it also comes from the character of the people. And we saw that with the tornado, and we're seeing it again with this.
Yeah, you're right. I do think Ohio, though, is not so much a swing state. Talking to Jim Jordan, he's pretty confident that Ohio is solidly red.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't be. Congressman, I also will add, too, that if you have wheezing and shortness of breath with a persistent cough, that's far different than just your runny nose or just a cough. So don't be taking up the time I don't think many people are going to give you a test unless you also have the shortness of breath and the wheezing to go along with it. That's the distinguishing difference between any other upper respiratory irritant like an allergy or any other form of infection.
Yeah, if I could add, COVID-19 really seems to spike the temperature. And the temperature, I was just reading a couple of medical journals this morning, the temperature is a prolonged temp. I mean, it's so if you're getting that fever along with those shortness of breath and you feel like you've come in contact with somebody, you probably need to call your doctor.
And get the test. You would actually qualify at that point.
Yeah, that's right.
Congressman, keep an eye on my money while you're there, will you?
I will do, sir.
All right, Congressman Mike Green, thank you so much for joining us and getting us up to speed on what everybody's battling in Washington over.